Welcome to the video. The gang is all here. Aunt Bunny wants to show you the jobs she did on the Panther Link. Thank you to Vicky in Arizona for that identification necklace. So she cleaned it up. It just looks fabulous. And she's real proud of herself for that. How's everybody doing? Hopefully y'all are on the mend. And if not, hang in there. We're thinking about you. The gang has everyone in their thoughts and prayers. This is a dumpster find. May this very special season bring you many joys, and may life's finest blessings be yours always. I told y'all I would do a reading. It comes from a book that I got in the dumpster, and I'm not sure what the copyright on this book is. One of those Roman numerals. It's older. And I wanted to do this for people that may be eating by themselves, don't have family, or have family, it doesn't matter, or not feeling well. To serve turkey and cranberry sauce. Thanksgiving has, of course, always been the time par excellence for food in New England, with roast turkey the traditional piece de resistance of the feast. Even the Puritans forgot their fear of sensualism at Thanksgiving, abandoning themselves with gusto to the pleasure of the table, though there were times when the country was a desert island for food, and the colonists, like castaways, were in no danger of overeating. There seems, however, to have been an abundance of provender at the first Pilgrim Thanksgiving at Plymouth in 1621, which was not an affair of a single day, but lasted a whole week, and contrary to what many persons think, was without any religious significance. It was simply a period of relaxation and recreation following the gathering of the first harvest. Yet it could hardly have been a time for rest, for the 4 women of the colony, upon whom fell the burden of preparing the food for the week's festivities. There were only 55 English left in Plymouth at the time, but Chief Massasoit stalked in at the head of 90 braves, and these friendly redskins were entertained by the whites for 3 days. The Indians, for their part, contributed venison to the communal larder, as the quartet of colonial dames, assisted by a servant and some young Puritan maids, slaved to feed the 60 men. The smell of the meat roasting over the open fires must have been good. I got postnasal drip. My doctor diagnosed it, so don't worry, I'm good. I just always have something going on with my allergies. I am not a candidate for allergy shots. We've tried that. I cannot handle the horse they put in there. Why they got to put horse stuff in allergy shots is beyond me, because I'm not around. Nobody's around horses. I mean, a few people are, but I'm not. It is safe to say that enormous quantities of food were consumed because the Indians were born gluttons, capable of tumbling more victuals into themselves than anyone would think humanly possible, and the colonial men present, if one may judge by the inherited capacity of some of their descendants, likewise gave a satisfactory account of themselves. Anyhow, the shooting was good around Plymouth that fall, so there was plenty of food for all. This we know from a letter which Edward Winslow wrote to a friend in England on December the 11th, 1621, in which he said, quote, "Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling, that so we might after a special manner rejoice together, after we had gathered the fruits of our labors. The four killed as much fowl as with a little help beside served the company about a week, at which time, among other recreations, we exercised our arms, many of the Indians coming amongst us, and among the rest their greatest king, Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted, and they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought and bestowed on our governor and upon the captains and others. It is a pleasant picture which Winslow sketches of the pilgrims at play after a year of unspeakable trials and hardships on the edge of the wilderness. Here is no group of long-faced men and women taking their pleasure sadly, but a lively band of people in holiday mood, indulging in feasting and in their favorite sports and pastimes. Since Governor Bradford mentioned that beside waterfowl there was great store of wild turkeys that fall, we may be certain that the men he sent out to make provision for the feast succeeded in bagging enough unsuspecting turkeys to make the tables groan. Other writers of the period have told of the great flocks of wild turkeys that inhabited the oak and chestnut forests of New England, so common were they that in the 1730s dressed wild turkeys sold for only a penny and a half a pound in western Massachusetts. The price, of course, increased as the wild turkey population decreased, and by the close of the 18th century, they were bringing 4 pence per pound. In 1820, when these great game birds were rapidly vanishing, the price had risen to 12.5 cents a pound, and it became less common to see wild turkey wings used as hearth brushes in New England homes. There is a delightful chapter in Brillat-Savarin's classic work on dining, The Psychologie du Goût, in which the famous French gastronomist tells how he shot a wild turkey near Hartford, Connecticut, in the summer of 1794. A refugee from the French Revolution, Brillat-Savarin, while staying at Hartford, was invited by an old farmer who lived in the backwoods to come and have some shooting. The farmer promised partridges, gray squirrels, and wild turkeys. Accordingly, one fine day in October, the Frenchman and a friend, mounted on 2 hacks, rode out some 5 leagues from Hartford. Reaching their journey's end toward evening, they sat down in the farmhouse to an abundantly supplied supper table. There was a superb piece of corned beef, a stewed goose, and a magnificent leg of mutton, with vegetables of every description, and at each end of the table 2 large jugs of cider. The next day they went shooting, killing some plum partridges first, then knocking over 6 or 7 gray squirrels, and finally their lucky star brought them into the middle of a flock of wild turkeys, which rose one after the other at short intervals, flying noisily and screaming loudly. The last and laziest bird rose only 10 paces from Brillat-Savarin, who promptly brought it down. He and his friend took the partridges, the squirrels, and the turkey back to Hartford, where the celebrated gourmet arranged a little dinner for some of his American friends, at which the wings of the partridges were served in papilotes and the gray squirrel stewed in Madeira. As for the turkey, which was the only roast we had, it was charming to look upon, delightful to smell, and delicious to taste. And so, until the last morsel was eaten, you could hear all around the table, "Very good, exceedingly good. Oh, my dear sir, what a glorious bit." It was not known where in the vicinity of Hartford Brillat-Savarin shot his wild turkey, but it may have been among the turkey hills of East Granbury, which are the same distance from Hartford that Brillat-Savarin says he traveled, and, as the name indicates, were once a haunt of the noble bird. A few years later there were no wild turkeys left in Connecticut, for the last specimen was recorded shot there in 1813. By the end of the 18th century, the wild turkeys of New England, which had been retreating steadily westward, reached the line of the Connecticut River, where they made their last stand. There were flocks of them in the Berkshires and the mountainous regions of Vermont, and among the hills of the Connecticut Valley. In the lifetime of the writer's grandparents, there were still wild turkeys around Mount Holyoke and Mount Tom. During the winter of 1850 to 51, the last one was shot on Mount Tom. A turkey killed on Mount Holyoke in 1863 is thought to have been a fugitive from a barnyard. Before the wild species were exterminated, they sometimes visited their civilized relatives of the barnyard. In the mating season, a wild turkey cock would fly in and strut and gobble and fight the domestic cock for the favors of the females. The wild gobblers always won, and in this way the domestic species was invigorated and kept up to scratch. The old New England expression, to talk turkey, was coined in New Hampshire sometime before 1846, when an Indian and a white man who had been hunting together came to divide the spoils, which consisted of a crow and a turkey. The white man, who was anxious to have the turkey, but wished to appear to make a fair division, said, "You take the crow and I'll take the turkey, or I'll take the turkey and you take the crow." The Indian grunted and replied, "Why you no talk turkey to me?" I don't get it. Why you not talk turkey? In the olden times, the New England housewife never had to worry about the Thanksgiving turkey being too large to fit her oven because she cooked it over an open fire. Families were larger then and big birds favored, but the oven problem brought about an unusual Thanksgiving innovation just before the festival of 1945. This was the sale of split turkeys occasioned by the great number of extraordinarily large birds coming into the market. Raised to meet the requirements of the armed forces, these birds were released from civilian consumption as a result of the sudden end of the war. Market men, knowing that many housewives had ovens too small to accommodate such whopping birds, split the oversized turkeys in two, and the housewives, agreeing that half a turkey was better than none, brought the bisected birds, although they were uncertain how to prepare half a bird for the table and were apprehensive that it might dry unduly while cooking. All apparently turned out well, but in the future smaller turkeys will probably be the rule. It is quite fitting that most of the cranberries which are made into sauce and eaten with turkey on Thanksgiving Day should come from New England, where the custom of serving cranberry sauce originated. The berry had existed in a wild state along New England shores since long before the coming of the Pilgrims, who, because the white blossom and stem bore a fancied resemblance to the head and neck of a crane, called it the craneberry. It still grows wild along the coast, not only on the mainland but on the coastal islands as well. The Cranberry Islands off the Maine coast near Mount Desert were named from the abundance of wild cranberries found growing there. The cultivated berry, as we know it today, is largely a product of Cape Cod. It was not until the days of sail were on the wane that the inhabitants of the Cape became interested in growing anything in the wastes of sand which reminded travelers of the deserts of Arabia. Obliged to cast about for a new means of livelihood, they began to cultivate the cranberry. A Cape resident had noticed that the vines around and over which the sand had drifted bore the best berries, and from this simple observation, the modern cranberry industry was developed. The old salts of Cape Cod financed many of their cranberry bogs in the same way they financed the building of their ships, by splitting the cost into 64 parts and selling interest in a bog as they had sold shares in a vessel. These cranberry shares have often been held in the same family for generations. Today, the cranberry bogs of Cape Cod produce 3/4 of the world's supply of the red berry with the tart taste. Pie, especially pumpkin pie, was considered as essential to the old-fashioned New England Thanksgiving dinner as turkey and cranberry sauce. A want of molasses with which to make pies was more than once the cause of a New England town postponing its observance of the day. Once at Newbury, Vermont, when the minister read the Thanksgiving proclamation, a worthy deacon who was not unmindful of the earthly pleasure to be derived from a good dinner, rose and said that as there was no molasses in town and his boys had gone to Charleston, New Hampshire to get some, he would move that Thanksgiving be postponed a week. When the boys did not return, the day was put off again until finally the people of Newbury had to go without their molasses. And since there was no sweetening, presumably also without the customary pumpkin pies, one can only guess what happened to the boys. Similarly, at Colchester, Connecticut, the celebration of Thanksgiving was delayed a week beyond the appointed day because a sloop from New York with a hogshead of molasses for pies failed to arrive. The New England governors in colonial times were not above using their annual Thanksgiving Day proclamations for purposes of political propaganda. Not only did they bid the people give thanks for the bounties of nature, but also for wise and beneficent laws effectively administered and for other blessings of good government. People who considered such political statements gross exaggerations or inventive reporting were thrown into a trampling rage, and ministers delivering Thanksgiving sermons in unheated meeting houses would sometimes give an offending governor a thorough raking over the coals. An amusing account of a public dinner given in 1714, at which bear meat and venison were eaten, has come down to us from the pen of Reverend Lawrence Conant of Danvers, Massachusetts, who was evidently not adverse to eating game that had been killed on the Sabbath. When ye services at ye meeting house were ended, he wrote, ye council and other dignitaries were entertained at ye house of Mr. Epes on ye hill nearby, and we had a bountiful Thanksgiving dinner with bear's meat and venison, the last of which was a fine buck, shot in ye woods nearby. Ye bear was killed in Lynn Woods near Reading. After ye blessing was craved by Mr. Garrick of Rentham, word came back that ye buck was shot on ye Lord's Day by Pequot, an Indian who came to Mr. Epes with a lie in his mouth like Aeneas of old. Ye council therefore refused to eat ye venison, but it was afterward decided that Pequot should receive 40 stripes save one for lying and profaning ye Lord's Day. Restored Mr. Epes ye cost of ye dear, and considering this a just and righteous sentence on ye sinful heathen, and that a blessing had been craved on ye meat, ye council all partook of it. But Mr. Shepherd, whose conscience was tender on ye point of ye venison. At Norwich, Connecticut, it was once the practice to celebrate Thanksgiving not only by eating turkey and cranberry sauce, but by lighting bonfires. In 1792, a young man was killed during the celebration. On Thursday evening last, says a newspaper account, a young man by the name of Cook, aged 19, was killed instantly in this town by the discharge of a swivel. The circumstances, as near as we can recollect, were as follows. In celebration of the day being Thanksgiving, a large number of boys had assembled, and by pillaging dry casks from the stores, wharfs, and etc., had erected a bonfire on the hill back of the landing, and to make their rejoicings more sonorous, fired a swivel several times. At last, a foolish fondness for a loud report induced them to be pretty lavish of their powder. The explosion burst the swivel into a multitude of pieces, the largest of which, weighing about 7 pounds, passed through the body of the deceased, carrying with his heart, and was afterwards found in the street, 30 or 40 rods from the place where it was fired. While the serious lament the accident, they entertain a hope that good may come of evil, that the savage practice of making bonfires on the evening of Thanksgiving may be exchanged for some other mode of rejoicing more consistent with the genuine spirit of Christianity. But this local custom of lighting bonfires on Thanksgiving Day continued in Norwich throughout the era of wooden barrels, or down to about the year 1925. They were touched off Thanksgiving morning, a man from Norwich told me, who, as a boy, had participated in these celebrations. There were bonfires on all the 7 hills of Norwich on Thanksgiving Day. Thanksgiving did not immediately become a fixed annual festival in New England after the first Pilgrim observance, but it made headway steadily. It proved popular because it was a substitute for the festival of Christmas, which the Puritans had banished. Minka, hi. It was as if they said, if we can't have Christmas, we'll have our own feast. The idea of a Thanksgiving Day for the Lord's bounties gradually spread throughout the country until this old New England custom became a national one. This is the book. Here's the author. And I don't know the year, actually, because it's one of those, probably 60s. Anyway, I've been reading quite a bit of it about, it's just different. I like it. It was going to the trash. So, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. The gang is thankful for all of you. And they're going to be here. We're still looking for gold, right, Billy Bob? Every day we're getting out there. Tomorrow we're supposed to get the truck worked on again. And it shouldn't take long. And then I'm going to try to take some scrap to the scrap yard and get all this scrap turned in that we've got. And I'll probably be making a little bit of a video on that. Thank you for joining us. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.